This was several years ago now when I was in college, and I was headed back to my apartment late one night after being out with friends. As I went to make a left turn into my complex, I checked to see if anyone was behind me, and since no one was in front or behind me, I opted not to worry about using a turn signal. I parked outside my building, and as I was crossing the street to get to my apartment, a car was driving towards me. I wondered where it had come from, since I was sure no one was near me when I turned in. But I was only 18, very sheltered and naive, and instead of being cautious or fearful, I instead wanted to be helpful. The car stopped approximately 16 feet or so away from me, as I was right in the middle of the street, and a man got out and asked,
"Do you live here?"
I thought maybe he needed directions, and I told him that I did live there. As he asked this, he was walking towards me, and as soon as I answered, he lunged at me, grabbed a handful of my hair in his right hand, and grabbed my throat with his left hand, and started dragging me to his car as he growled,
"I ought to cut your fucking throat."
To say I was in shock was an understatement. His car was running with the door open, and it wasn't until I got to his car door before my brain literally used my name and said, "Caitlin, scream." Once I finally started screaming, he pushed me away while he jumped in his car and took off, and I ran into my apartment. I was shaking so badly, I could barely get the key into the lock, and once I was inside, I realized my boyfriend was there, because he'd come by earlier in the night to surprise me. But since I wasn't home, he'd gone on to bed. Of course, I was still freaking out, but instead of him being concerned, he acted like an ass because he was upset that I was coming in so late, so I didn't even call the police. Once I told my mom the next day, she insisted I call them, but of course, nothing ever came of it. I often wondered what the guy thought that I did to deserve to have my fucking throat cut. I'm sure it wasn't because I didn't use a turn signal, so I even wonder where he came from. I never wanted to meet him again, and I always hoped no one else did either. I was a stubborn and precocious teen. At age 15, I had a lot of friends, but I was a bit of a loner and enjoyed long walks in nature. Very long walks, sometimes 10+ miles. Since I couldn't drive yet, I would often just take off from my house and walk on back roads all day long. This was before smartphones. As I was a 100-pound, very thin, tiny girl, my parents probably shouldn't have allowed it, but they have always been very relaxed in their parenting. But like I said, I was stubborn. I also had an unhealthy attitude of invulnerability and naivety. On these walks, people would often pull over and ask me if I needed a ride. The vast majority were men. I never said yes. Usually, I would respond politely with, "No thank you, I'm on a walk," and they would leave me alone. Maybe after an "Are you sure?" and a concerned look at most. This happened literally hundreds of times without incident. However, there was this one time that I got a bit lost while walking. Not severely lost, as I could easily backtrack the 5 or 6 miles home. But I had taken a wrong turn and wandered into a very rural area that I had not expected to be in. Whatever, it was a nice day, so I kept walking. A guy in his early 30s, a bit of a junky car, passed by and asked if I needed a ride, as per usual. I politely declined and he drove on. I got creepy vibes, but didn't think much of it. Then, 10 minutes later, he pulled up behind me again. This was a rural road, and he must have driven in a very large loop to come up behind me again, miles out of the way. He slowly started driving alongside me while I walked, and asking personal questions. My name, my age, where I lived. I did not tell the truth. He also repeatedly tried to get me into his car. I was very uncomfortable and just wanted him to go away, but was too afraid to be rude. However, I was not getting into his car. After an excruciating 5 minutes or so of this, another car came, and he was forced to drive off again. I was more annoyed than scared at this point. That good old invulnerable attitude. Then, like clockwork, 10 minutes later, to my horror, I see the car again. This time, he doesn't drive alongside me, but parks in a pullout a few feet ahead. I don't know what came over me, but instead of panic, my brain just shut down and I became entirely disassociative. I decided to just ignore him. I walked by the car calmly, continuing my walk. I tried not to look at him, but I stole a glance. He was pointing something at me. It was a gun. Before I had time to react or even think, a motorcycle pulled up behind us and parked. My stalker seemed extremely panicked by this and peeled out as quickly as possible. I must have looked freaked out because the motorcyclist, who looked like a dad type, was concerned. He asked me if I was okay and if I needed a ride. I gave my usual, "No thank you, I'm on a walk," and he drove off. I was feeling pretty disgusting at that point, and aside from that, I didn't want to climb onto a motorcycle with anyone, even though he had saved me from something potentially very bad. Looking back, I owe quite a lot to him. I'm not sure what compelled him to stop, but thank goodness he did. I then ran long distance home, looking over my shoulder the entire way. I never saw that man again. I didn't tell my parents because I was afraid of them restricting my freedoms. I still took my long walks, but not again in that area, until a popular nature reserve was opened there years later. To the creepy guy who really wanted me to get into his car, let's not meet. When I was 16 years old, I decided to surprise my parents with a bouquet of flowers for Valentine's Day. We've always celebrated this as a family holiday rather than a romantic one. I didn't have a car to drive to the florist, but my high school was within walking distance of a hospital, boasting a gift shop that sells floral arrangements. Between classes during the week of Valentine's Day, I set off for the hospital by my lonesome, cutting across campus to walk through a network of side roads populated with specialty doctors' offices that keep odd hours. The sort of buildings where traveling doctors mainly hold surgery consultations or perform small procedures a few times a month. The trip there passed without incident. As I was walking back through said deserted roads with a vase of flowers in tow, I noticed an unkempt 1990s car close behind me. While my memory of the car is hazy, I am left with the impression that there were at least 2 men within whose faces I could not see. Initially, I assumed that the driver was simply afraid of hitting me, the reason they weren't passing me by, so I made a point of dramatically trudging further into the grassy shoulder of the road, demonstrating to them they could safely drive ahead. They still refused to pass me by, continuing to creep along behind at a slow pace. Beginning to suspect that the driver was more interested in me than a destination, I began to walk faster. The car confirmed my suspicion by matching my speed. Despite the impracticality of my shoes, and the threat of spilling water from my face, I commenced to run as fast as I possibly could. They hit the gas and again matched my speed. I realized at this point that the car was following me, that there was no one in sight to notice, and I needed to get away. I bolted into the first parking lot that I saw. The car turned in after me. Despite there being only 2 or 3 cars in the spacious front parking lot, and there being no other sign of activity at the office, this car did not stop to park in the numerous spaces available there. The driver instead opted to pursue me in the partially under construction back portion of the lot. It passed every available parking space to corner me against a pile of debris and rubble from the construction, coming to a diagonal stop less than 3 feet away. Before anyone could emerge from the vehicle, I somehow managed to scale the small prominence of rubble against my back, face in hand, and jumped from its peak to land painfully on the other side, which fortunately was a plot of undeveloped land within sight of my high school campus. I took a quick peek back over my shoulder to see if they were still in pursuit, but the car had sped off after I reached the top of the rubble pile and was now nowhere in sight. They had not parked in the lot at all. They had no business there. The driver was following me. I sprinted at top speed and didn't stop until I was soaked with sweat in the dead of winter and panting in the student lounge among my classmates, who didn't seem to give a damn when I told them, possibly because our hometown is supposedly a human trafficking capital and the crime rate is outrageous, although I am convinced that this was something more informal than human trafficking, as the dilapidated car suggested poverty, and I have read that human trafficking usually arises through grooming and not being snatched off the streets. In retrospect, I should have told an adult, alerted campus security, and called the non-emergency line of the police station, but I was young, foolish, insecure, and afraid of getting in trouble for leaving campus when I didn't have a signed permission form permitting me to do so. I kept trying to convince myself that I had misread the situation or was overreacting. I don't know what I would have even told the police had I called them, as I was entirely ignorant on the subject of cars and couldn't have identified the make of it had I been asked, and I couldn't see the faces of the occupants. I was also worried that my parents would restrict my already extremely limited freedoms if they knew I had been in any danger. I feel horrible for having never told anyone, and earnestly hope that my secrecy hasn't led to someone being hurt or killed. I believe the only missing people, aside from runaway children or elderly adults with dementia in this city right now, are men, aside from one woman a few decades ago. Whoever followed and tried to trap a 16-year-old girl with flowers at a doctor's office just before Valentine's Day of 2016. Let's not meet. This happened way back in October of 2006. At that time, I was just a 19-year-old kid, always on the lookout for an adventure. One Friday night, after wrapping up my shift in McDonald's, I met up with some friends who suggested we check out this haunted location called White's Bridge. My one buddy, Brandon, said he had recently learned about it and began telling us the legends associated with the 100-year-old wood-covered bridge. Never one to turn down a spooky adventure, we all piled into my green Ford Taurus and headed out onto our journey. Brandon gave directions, guiding me off the main road, and within minutes we were on the dirt back roads, surrounded by woods and cornfields. Our only point of reference was a blinking cell tower off in the distance. We could tell we were getting further from the city as our cell phones began slowly losing service. As we rode deeper and deeper into what legitimately felt like the absolute middle of nowhere, Brandon repeated the legend associated with the bridge. Back in the early 1900s, a local farmer discovered that his beloved wife had been cheating on him, and in a fit of rage, he killed her and her lover after discovering them in the act. After committing the cold-blooded murder, the farmer left his home and wandered the dirt roads in a daze. He eventually came upon White's Bridge, where the realization of what he had done finally began to sink in, and deciding he would rather die than face the consequences of his actions, he hoisted a rope up and over one of the bridge's rafters and hung himself. As far as I can tell now, the story is complete fiction, but we totally believed it at the time. After a long and bumpy ride, Brandon instructed me to turn right on an off-road I wouldn't have even noticed was there had he not pointed it out. I took the turn, and there before us was White's Bridge. It looked like something straight out of a horror film. An old wood-covered bridge, aged by time, sitting alone above a river deep in the middle of nowhere. We parked the car on the side of the road and got out to explore. Immediately catching our eyes was a scarecrow lying abandoned at the entrance of the bridge. My friend Mike, who was known as somewhat of a risk-taker, and a stupid one at that, picked up the scarecrow and lit it on fire. The hay body burst up into a ball of flames as Mike waved it around proudly next to the old dry wood bridge. Realizing the risk, I told him to throw the damn thing over into the river and put it out, which thankfully he did. After making sure there weren't any rogue embers that could ignite the bridge, Brandon suggested that we get back in the car and pull it onto the bridge. He explained that the legend was that if you parked the car in the middle of the bridge, put it in neutral, and killed the engine, the spirit of the dead farmer would push the vehicle forward to get it off the bridge. Naturally, we had to try this. We piled back in and did exactly as he said. We parked halfway across the rickety old bridge and killed the engine. We sat in the pitch black, saying nothing, waiting for something, anything to happen. The only sounds were the creaking of the bridge, the river flowing beneath us, and footsteps. Suddenly, the back driver's side door opens and a woman abruptly enters the back seat, cramming in next to my two friends. She looked to be in her late 20s, early 30s, long straight black hair, slim, and wearing a plaid shirt and blue jeans. It's been a while, but this is essentially how I remember the conversation going. "I saw your fire signal for me," she said. Wait, what?" I replied, totally freaked out and at a complete loss for words. "I'm so glad you came. My boyfriend's car broke down that way. I need a ride back." My brain was doing its best to compute the situation. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" I asked. "What are you doing out here?" "I told you," she responded curtly. "My boyfriend's car broke down over there. Could you please just give me a ride so I don't have to walk all the way back?" She was pointing ahead towards a narrow road that forked off to the right on the other side of the bridge. My friend Mike, the scarecrow burner, and ever the gentleman, added, "I mean, if you need a place to stay, you're more than welcome to come crash at my place. I've got plenty to drink." And I interrupted him. "No, lady, listen. I'm sorry. I don't know who you are. You just got in my car, and this is all really weird. You could be an axe murderer for all I know. And I'm sorry, you have to get out." She glared at me in the rearview mirror. If looks could kill, I would have been done for. "But you signaled for me," she responded in an irritated tone. "We weren't signaling for you. Get out." She let out an angry sigh and got out, walking back in the direction from which she came, and disappearing into the night. I started the engine right up and looked at my friends. They all had looks of disbelief on their face. Without saying a word, I put the car in drive and slowly rolled forward and off the bridge. We needed to turn around and go back across the bridge to get back to where we had come from, and the only way to do that was to pull onto the side road that the woman had said her boyfriend's car had broken down on, and then reverse. As I pulled onto the side road, my headlights illuminated the 3 posted signs that I hadn't been able to see from the bridge. No trespassing, private property, and do not enter. Looking up the road, there was no sign of the woman. Wherever she went, it didn't appear she went that way. I didn't want to stick around though, so I backed up and crossed the bridge again, and from there began the journey home. We didn't have much to say on the ride home. I think we were all equally stunned, except for Mike, who asked if he knew anyone that would be awake at this hour that he could score some weed from. I visited White's Bridge a couple other times after that, but nothing of note happened in my subsequent visits. Sadly, some delinquents burned down the old White's Bridge some years ago. It was rebuilt, but from what I hear, it's just not the same as the original. I don't have any plans to go check it out. To the strange lady who entered my car out of the middle of nowhere at 2 a.m., let's not meet. To understand my story, you sort of have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws in our country, in that we don't have any. So as long as you're respectful and non-destructive, you can walk over any hills as you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, so long as you leave the area as how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of parents, friends, and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at a time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There were always yachts bobbing just off the shore with people in them and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby, even though this was the middle of nowhere. I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in the winter of 2010, after picking her out that November from the shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I paid her adoption fee. Narrated. I know you love dogs and she will be very important to the story later on, so let me tell you a little bit about Parmesan. Parmesan came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dogfighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my best guess is a Lurcher Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her. She'll have you. So by the time of this camping trip, I had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but far as my family are concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my dad, and my mom. I didn't mind. I wasn't attached to the other kids. I'd rather play with my dog, and still, I'd have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we left a bit later, although I don't remember why we left later than normal, we arrived at sunset. Not a good time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up and the beach illuminated in campfires. The beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car, while they sat pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan before getting out. It was pretty hot for that time of the year, and I wanted her to have air. Always gotta be looking out for my furry little homie. As we're fumbling around in the dark, on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big O shape if you felt like it. I wasn't really paying any attention to the road. I was complaining I was tired, as kids are, but my mom was. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent into the sand, my mom started asking if he had seen that car drive around. It's been a few times. My dad kind of shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more minutes, a car pulled up next to ours and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low, except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else out there at this point, and I think my mom must have said it must be the security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do their nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been drunk or high because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool, a junkie. Not an unusual find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into flashlight range, we realized that he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches. Although I was small at the time, so maybe a sense of scale was off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him once he saw this guy. He got up immediately, holding on to the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and that he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy, and told him that was fine, we'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting, and the man kept shouting back. My sister and I were crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in that situation. It really did seem like this guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I'm absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad and possibly us as well once he was done, as I don't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put Dad in her relationship with him above us. This isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black like a wolf descending on its prey took us all by surprise. Most of all the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator large canines represent in nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife as it had been in the arm she had got him by. He kicked her, he punched her, and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan didn't follow him. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. Quickly as we could, we gathered our things and all got back in the car, all pretty shook up by the incident. I looked Parmy over. She was okay, but the car's window was much more open than I had left it. We think what happened was that when the shouting started, she must have put her paws up on the gap I'd left for her, as it was an old car and had the rolly-down windows and not the electric button. We think she must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. This is not the end of my story. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book into a hotel for the night. My parents decided just to drive home so we could all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol, as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean Parmesan up a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she had just done for us blew my mind. As we drove into town, we came across a petrol station, but it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look and stuck his head out the window to get a better look at the sign. My mom asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart fucking sank. Parked in the corner, behind a van so we hadn't seen him at first, was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car, using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else in town, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was remove. The next town over was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much petrol, we realized, as we began driving. We were going to break down. That's fine, Dad said. We had AAA to cover. They'd come tow us home, or at least somewhere acceptable for the night. Better than staying in the last town. After driving for maybe 15 minutes, lights flash us from behind. Another car. The same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He must have realized we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps, so it wouldn't upset us. But we weren't really little kids. We were both double digits. We knew how dangerous the situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E for empty for the last 10 miles. We were driving on fumes. I really don't believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refueled to a fuel tank before driving the rest of the way home. Sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home, just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mom phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently the woman she spoke to said that they may wish to in the future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if he actually was that guy, or just some random psycho. As I said, they never got back to her.